say be happy with what you got.
You'll be happy. Me, I want what's coming to me.
Oh, well, what's coming to you, Tony?
The world, Chico. And everything in it. What I try to tell you, this country, you gotta make the money first. Then when you get the money, you get the power. Then when you get the power, then you get the woman. That's why you gotta make your own moves.
Welcome to the Rewind Movie Podcast.
Lesson number 1. Don't underestimate the other guy's greed.
The following review will contain spoilers and may contain strong language.
Remember I told you when you started, the guys who last in this business, the guys who fly straight, low-key, quiet, and the guys who want it all. Chicas, champagne, flash, don't last.
As part of our throwback series, today we'll be looking at Scarface 1983, starring Al Pacino, Michelle Pfeiffer, Stephen Bauer, Robert Loggia, and Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio. Directed by Brian De Palma.
Told you a long time ago, you fucking little monkey, not to fuck me.
Brother, do you want to go to war? Come on, do you want to go to war? We'll take you to war, okay? Do you want to play rough? Okay. Say hello to my little friend. You want to play rough? Okay. Yeah. Okay, you like that? Huh? You want more?
Hello and welcome to the Rewind Movie Podcast. It's Gali in Glasgow.
And F. Murray Abraham. It's Devlin, I'm in London. We're here to talk about Scarface.
Yes, Scarface. I've got to say, this one I'd seen many times as a youngster, which is probably not ideal considering the violence, the language, and everything else that goes with it. I kind of left it alone, and then all of a sudden, in 2002, a game came out called GTA Vice City. You ever play it?
A couple of times. I'm not hugely into computer games, as you know, but yes, I have played it. I was never as wrapped up in it as virtually every other teenage boy.
I got it at Christmas, 2002. Loved it, the music, the aesthetic, everything about it. Great game. And then that kind of brought my focus back into Scarface, and I believe that was probably the last time I'd seen it. I couldn't remember much about the film, coming back to it again. But what about you?
As I said last time out, I didn't believe that I'd ever seen the whole film. It turns out I'd seen basically the scenes that people have seen, the big moments, the which largely happened towards the end of the film. So the early stages of the film were completely alien to me. It ended up being quite a different viewing experience than what I'd come to expect, because my mental image of Scarface was entirely based around like you say, the GTA Vice City thing, and all of those Grand Theft Auto games were always being called in to the public sphere as being a terrible influence on young people because they were just unbridled violence and that they were very callous. And Scarface is super famous and popular amongst like 90s hip hop aficionados.
Yeah, it was strange, right? So in the I think it was like Nas, and there's a rapper as well called Scarface. But I think Nas did an album where he referred to Scarface. Jay-Z did a music video with Mariah Carey, Heartbreaker, where he references the bathtub in the Tony's mansion. It's strange how they just appropriated Scarface as this is the film. I mean, what are your thoughts on it?
I was aware of it because as a misguided, culturally confused teenager in Darlington, I got well into the Wu-Tang Clan in the late 90s.
Oh, great choice.
Which, I agree. I mean, was it a great idea to wear a Wu wear hockey jersey that was 9 sizes too big for me around the streets of County Durham? Probably not. I looked like a moron. So it's an interesting one. Also, I mean, it's been parodied to now. Like, if you remember the Curb Your Enthusiasm episode where he befriends Crazy Eyes Killer,
Yeah.
and he says that he's gonna have a TV on the ceiling in his bedroom playing Scarface 24/7. Just after boasting about how he decided to have 4 steps in his house because it was better than 3.
I think what it was in the 90s when hip hop really became a big thing. Obviously, most hip hop artists, P Diddy excluded, were kind of people that had come from the gutter, from nowhere, and then all of a sudden were making loads of money. Most popular thing in Western culture. And I think they relate to the story of Tony Montana coming from nowhere and then rising to the top. Maybe they're missing the satire. I don't know.
Things that are becoming quite prominent now is talking about representation in media, and there's a lot of weird racial coding in this film.
Yes, including the cast.
Baffling. So, so that was a strange one in that I remember reading an article, and you never know how seriously to take these things because the people that write the articles are people who are paid to overthink things, which is great. I like it, but you always wonder how much it actually relates to most people's viewing experience. Most people don't put 5 layers of thought processes behind how they react to something. They just react to it.
Absolutely.
If mainstream cinema is only going to show you villains that you can relate to, then you relate to the villains and not the villainous behaviors. You take what you can or what you want from the characters that you're given.
Yeah, I think the parallels are quite clear though between Tony Montana's character and the rappers that were coming out in the early 90s. They're not part of the establishment. They're independently successful and they're hugely ambitious. And I think that's all embodied in The World Is Yours.
Would you give us a quick synopsis of the film?
In May 1980, a Cuban man named Tony Montana, played by Al Pacino, claims asylum in Florida and is in search of the American dream. Unable to convince immigration he is not a criminal, Tony and his best friend, Manny, played by Stephen Bauer, are detained in Freedom Town. They kill an influential Cuban politician for a gangster named Frank, played by Robert Loggia. Oh, what a legend. In exchange for release and a green card. Whilst working in a sandwich truck, Tony and Manny are offered another job by Omar to do a drug deal with some Colombians for cocaine, or as it's also known, yeyo.
Excellent.
The deal with the Colombians goes wrong and Tony's friend is hacked up with a chainsaw. Tony manages to retrieve the money and the yayo and insists on meeting Frank. Tony and Manny meet Frank and his beautiful girlfriend Alvira, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, as they are recruited into the drug world. 3 months later, Tony has worked his way up the organisation and is now a trusted member. Tony visits his mother and younger sister, Gina, played by Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, and warns Manny not to go near Gina. Tony and Omar are in Bolivia, negotiating a deal with a powerful drug lord named Souza. Omar is killed, accused of being an informant, and Tony makes the deal with Souza, despite Frank not knowing. Tony dismisses Frank's warnings about Souza and explains that those who are greedy in this business, they don't last. Tony immediately makes a proposition to Alvira, stating he wants to marry her. Frank then tries to have Tony assassinated, but Tony survives and then goes and kills Frank and takes Alvira with him. Tony's deal with Souza makes him fortunes, and we see him build his empire, marry Alvira, and buy Gina a hair salon. But when he is caught laundering money by the police, Tony is forced to help Souza kill an influential Bolivian journalist who is drawing media attention to Souza and his colleague. Souza's assassin has planted a remote bomb in the journalist's car, but when Tony sees a woman and child climb into the vehicle, he kills the assassin before it can detonate. Souza declares war on Tony for fucking him over the failed assassination. Meanwhile, Gina and Manny have gone missing. Tony finds the address where Gina has been staying from his mother and goes to the house. Manny and Gina have got married. Manny answers the door and Tony kills him and takes Gina back with him to his mansion. Souza has dispatched a kill squad to Tony's mansion. They proceed to kill all of Tony's men until he's the only one left. Despite showing them his little friend, Tony is shot in the back, falling into a pool of water. The camera pans up and we see the sign, "The world is yours."
That's very thorough. I like it.
I'm just going to draw something that I didn't mention before we went through the plot. Essentially, a remake of Howard Hawks' 1932. I think it was Scarface.
An adaptation, a reworking. It's interesting in the era, because we're looking at 1983 here, which is 1 year after John Carpenter reworked Howard Hawks' The Thing from Another World into The Thing. And what are we talking, maybe 2 years before Cronenberg reworked The Fly into The Fly?
But I want to talk a little bit about De Palma because I think he's an interesting choice for this type of film, and at this point in his career as well. So he's for those that don't really know who Brian De Palma is, he kind of came up with a bunch of directors from the 70s and 80s that made probably some of the most important films, certainly of our generation, and maybe the generation beforehand. Spielberg, Lucas, Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese. They were all friends. They all came up at about the same time. Spielberg and De Palma were really, really close. So much so that Spielberg directed a couple of shots in this film, and we'll point them out later on. But I always thought that De Palma was the more voyeuristic and the slightly he's more willing to go for a controversial subject matter, whereas Scorsese, yes, and Coppola, yes, but certainly Lucas and Spielberg tend to be more of your popcorn directors, and De Palma's always been slightly outside of that sort of Hollywood machine. He's more famous for violence, and he's got a bit of a reputation as well because he takes a lot from Hitchcock.
Yeah.
But he also took some of the bad side of Hitchcock as far as his treatment of women and being accused of being a misogynist, which I think is unfair. I'm talking about a film called Dress to Kill, which was just the film before this, before he did Scarface with Michael Caine as a cross-dressing killer. And then a film that he does a year later after this, which was completely lambasted by the critics, called Body Double. It's a hard, violent, visceral film. That's what he's famous for. But here he is doing a gangster film, which is interesting because, like I said, he's friends with Francis Ford Coppola. And one of the things that I know in interviews and he's talked about is that he wanted to make a gangster film completely far removed from probably the most famous gangster film, which is The Godfather. And he definitely makes a completely different film to The Godfather.
This is very true. I mean, to go back to your point about accusations of misogyny and whatnot, and I get that what you're saying, that the films that he makes kind of rely on those tropes. I guess that tends to be a bit self-selecting though, like that he did choose to make those films.
Yeah, he chose to make them, but I think he's interested in slightly
Oh, yeah,
more
yeah.
unconventional themes and characters. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but it has probably affected his career. I'm not sure out of the group of directors that I just mentioned that he all came up with that De Palma's name is at the top. He's probably the one with the less cachet out of all the directors that I mentioned.
Yeah, those guys are all brands. They're all brands unto themselves.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Even if the shine has come off most of them by now, there's really only Spielberg that's still trucking ahead, and even then,
well, no one went to see BFG.
So this is De Palma's anti-Godfather. Godfather being Coppola's very weighty, literate, kind of classy, and very classicist and very formal exploration of the internal workings of a mafia family, and the seduction of a character that starts out as a young innocent and is sort of drawn into the world of organized crime, and he does it because of family and loyalty, and he ends up, by the infamous third film, kind of losing everything.
It's interesting that you mentioned about structure and formality. What else is in The Godfather is a sense of ethics, of a code of practice.
Yeah.
They don't mind gambling, they don't mind soliciting sex, but drugs is a no-no. And in this film, I'm not saying there's no ethics in this, because there is, but what we see is unbridled chaos as far as the way that the gangster organization. There doesn't really seem to be one. And that's one of the reasons why Tony's able to just rise to the top so quickly, because there isn't that sort of tiered level of hierarchy whereby, you start off as a capo and then you work up to a general, and that it seems more structured in The Godfather and in this.
Yeah, well, he jumps in an edit. He jumps up the food chain, and he jumps again when he stops working with Frank, his mentor, the guy who's brought him into the business, the guy who was giving him a job. In one edit and a bit of expositional dialogue from Michelle Pfeiffer, he's now struck out on his own.
One of the other differences as well is the violence between the two of them. So instead of Godfather, where we've got some oranges spilling on the ground, and it's done in a very artistic and almost classy way, in this film, De Palma puts the violence front and center, and he shows you in a really graphic way. The same with the cinematography as well. Everything's bright, everything's clear. There's very little contrast in the whole film. When I talk about contrast, I mean within the light and the way that shadows played within the Godfather series. It's all dark rooms, confined spaces.
I did notice a couple of times, because I very, very much admired the cinematography in this film. The image that you might have of Miami is that kind of nuclear orange glow that Horatio gets to bathe in every week in CSI Miami. This is a little different. It's a little less heavily processed, but that's the sunlight during the day is so bright and everyone's so slick and everyone's got that kind of sheen of sweat on them because it's hot. And then the nights you get these sort of crazy psychedelic sunsets every night. There's a few moments where they're very careful to just drop in little hints. There's when you mentioned in the plot synopsis the moment where Tony sort of snaps at Manny and tells him to stay away from Gina. The two of them are sitting in the car together, and they're lit from the front of the car, which is where the camera is. And you've got Manny, and he's there, and he's all fully lit. The rest of the set is quite dark around them. I assume they're just using a part of the car, maybe even the sunshade or something. They're using something as a flag to cut a really hard shadow across Tony's face, so that he sort of, when he's talking, when he's snapping at him, he retreats slightly into this darkness. So you only get to see about 2/3 of his face, and and he's also got this very harsh but very thin rim light just around him. It's kind of cool. There's a lot of little touches like that in the lighting, which it's not overly stylized. Well, the entire film is stylized ridiculously, but the lighting in these scenes, there's just these little moments every now and then when you need them. It's those little smart choices that mark this out as the work of a director who's clearly got a handle on everything that's going on screen.
No, absolutely. And in the last episode, we kind of threw pelters at Branagh for not really having a good visual style, not being able to translate Mary Shelley's Frankenstein's literature and create a visual story that was engaging. And I think that's because we were dealing with a stage director. Here, the fundamental difference is that we're dealing with a director who is a visualist. He's a visual director, and he knows how to tell a story using visuals. On top of that, he's got an actor in Al Pacino who, at this point in his career, he's transitioning to the Hollywood superstar that is Al Pacino, the hoo-ha. And if you do not like Al Pacino in Heat, you ain't gonna like Al Pacino in Scarface.
I was telling you, was it last week or the week before, that I'd seen, again, it sounds like I've never seen a film. I saw Cruising for the first time ever. I actually saw it in a really strange format, though, which is that a musician had kind of cut Cruising into pieces and was playing it pretty much chronologically, but was choosing specific scenes to re-edit and rescore live with like a synth score that he'd either improvised or composed beforehand. But that was the first time I'd ever actually seen any of Cruising, and that to me looked very much like the young kind of swivel-eyed, live Pacino of Dog Day Afternoon and The Godfather. He's a very quiet and thoughtful performer.
He's an introvert in The Godfather. He's an extrovert in Scarface.
Yeah.
There's one scene I'm going to point towards, and it wasn't even me that pointed it out. She'll like this. So my girlfriend, I didn't realize, was a huge fan of Scarface. So when I watched this for the first time last week, she was just like quoting all the lines. I was like, "Whoa, what's this?"
Oh, really?
Huge fan of Scarface, and she pointed out the
Huge fan of 90s hip hop.
yeah, but clearly, well, just like me, you know, I didn't like Wu-Tang Clan. I was more of a Public Enemy kind of guy, but you know, whatever. And she pointed out the scene when Tony is with Omar doing the deal with Souza, and how Tony starts eating the lemon as opposed to what it should be used for, which is to clean your hands. And there was a little touches like that were great, you know, because he's called out for it at the beginning of the film by Omar as he's a fucking peasant, and he really is. He's totally uncultured. He's got no real class, and that bit where he's eating the lemon just made me chuckle. We'll jump ahead a little bit here, Devlin, but I've got a quick question about the deal with the Colombians. Does Omar know that the Colombians are going to turn on Tony? Because they set up him as an antagonist to Tony straight away when they're coming from the sandwich van. Tony refuses to make the deal for marijuana and is like, "Whoa, no, you don't pay 500 for a deal for marijuana." And then Omar says, "Oh, you want to be a big shot? Okay, well, the deal with these Colombians." And the guy who's in the car with him, and I made a note of it, kind of just says to him, the Colombians. And I just think, does Omar know? Not that it bothered me. I was just interested to know what you thought.
It's a good question. I would say it's very possible. I also want to take this opportunity to once again just say F. Murray Abraham, because he's awesome and one of the least Cuban people I've ever seen.
Oh, you know what? We could get into that. Do you want to get into how this film would not get made in 2018 with this cast?
We could. And as I was saying before, the strange racial coding. So so let's go through all of our either very Italian American or very Jewish Cubans.
Well, we have one Cuban though. I think Stephen Bauer is actually Cuban.
Is he actually Cuban?
I think he is. Yeah.
Good for him.
I think he is, and I think he was cast because he looks the part. He does. I think he's great in the film.
Oh yeah, I think he's brilliant. I think as that kind of lunk-headed, you know, he reminds me of his from that '70s show. Who's the guy we all hate now? Ashton Kutcher. Back when he used to be kind of charming in that '70s show.
Lovable kind of idiot.
Like yeah, you know, like most of the things he does are terrible. He's constantly just hounding women, but he's just he's still sort of likable, and he comes across as this somewhat of an innocent.
Yeah, he is, isn't he? And even though he does some pretty despicable things, he kills people. I got emotional when he died. I was like, oh, I was gutted that Manny got killed.
Well, I was trying to tease out, you know, when we watch these films for the second time, we usually like to make a couple of notes, and I had this note on him, which was that you never see him do coke, which is interesting. He's offered it twice, never takes it. And I had, up until a certain point, I was like, I don't think, even though you must know he's a killer because he's the guy who hooks up the job. He's the guy who hooks up the job to kill Rebenga in Freedom Town. So you know that at some point he was and he is an integral part of this gangster family. You don't see him kill anyone. Then literally as I finished writing that sentence, I remembered that he shoots Frank, so it's ruined.
But he is our only Cuban, and it's just interesting how everyone got some fake tan, apart from Mary Elizabeth, Master Antonio.
She just got some inexplicable hair.
It looked like Soul Glow.
It did. I was trying to imagine what the texture of it would be because it seems very dense.
Just let your soul glow.
It's super confusing.
Yeah, it's an interesting choice. Everyone's good in it though. Yeah, none of the accents really really ring
Robert
false.
Loggia. I went through Robert Loggia's IMDb page because obviously there's a couple of people in this film who are those guys from The Thing.
He's definitely
Mel
one
the
of them.
cop.
He's definitely one of them.
Yeah, he's one. Mel the cop is of course the judge from Ghostbusters 2.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, Loggia.
He's in Independence Day. That's where I know him from most. But he's also he's a big staple of David Lynch. But for me, it's Independence Day all day long.
That's you on. Also, that very odd boxing movie, Gladiator. Do you remember
Oh
that?
God,
Cuba
yeah,
Gooding Jr.
yeah, I remember that one. Terrible.
Yeah, and all the old Pink Panther movies as well. He was in a lot of
Yeah.
those.
Yeah, he was, wasn't he? And he's great in it. He's great.
Hmm.
But so I don't think I'm not saying it's right, but considering for the time that they wouldn't have just got a load of Cubans, or there wouldn't have been that
Yeah.
that social push to make sure that there was a diverse cast. I thought the cast, considering none of them are Cuban, do a really, really good job. But then that is coming from a non-Cuban, so
Well, exactly. That's the problem. That's the problem with whenever anyone kind of argues against this
it's
idea.
always
When people like to say like like everyone should be allowed to play whatever, actors should be allowed to play whatever because their job is to create a character. But what happens is that you end up with a whole generation of people who think a Cuban sounds like an Italian American doing an impression of a Cuban, and that's the problem. It's like how everyone thinks that William Wallace was a blue-eyed Australian with an Irish accent.
7 foot tall and lightning out of his arse.
So I've heard. Which, of course, that has now spread to Scotland. If you go to Stirling Castle and go into the gift shop, you will find key rings and other paraphernalia with a very Mel Gibson-esque representation of William Wallace. So
Well, hopefully they haven't quoted all of his best lines like the ones on the police video.
they have. That used to be my keyring when I was a kid.
What, including the one about the Jews?
Yes.
Well, we'll move on. We spent a long time talking about De Palma and being a visual director, and I think this scene is great. Set up, payoff, and the Colombian scene. There's loads of it. There's also just loads of little treats that you can just get into.
It's fantastic.
It's great, isn't it? The way that they set up immediately when they're driving in the car and Manny's getting distracted and Tony's like, focus, focus, focus. That obviously plays in later on when he's being distracted by the blonde whilst all the mayhem's going on in the room. It's wonderful. But what I wanted to bring attention to was the camera work. De Palma, very influenced by Hitchcock, especially Vertigo. And the way that this scene is shot and it pans across from one section to another, it's wonderful. It ramps up the tension, and I think it's just great.
This was the point when I was watching it and realizing that the film I had constructed in my head was not what I was going to get. I was completely enthralled by this. Like, it didn't have the big, silly ridiculousness of the montage or the ending. This is a different film. This is honestly, this is the stuff that drew me in more. I know the ending is super famous and really iconic, but I must admit I just found it mildly exhausting. Whereas this level of tension, this is what, like a 10-minute long scene, maybe more.
Yeah, no, I think it is about 10 minutes long. But they cut between the outside and the inside, and we see the street level with Manny and the radio. But I'm also gonna give massive credit to the sound design.
Yes,
the way that they bring in the track from the radio, slowly fade in the chainsaw. So he grabs Tony. The deal goes bad immediately. There's a lovely setup where the woman who looks dodgy straight away is lying on a pillow, and you're immediately on edge, thinking that's not right.
I love the when you say sound design as well. I love that choice of having really nerve-wracking, tinny siren sound coming from the TV show. there's a police chase on some drama, and it's like that siren just keeps piercing at you, and because the score in this is very strange, right? This is an unusual film score.
Yeah, I will talk about the music later on. I've got a few.
Mm.
I'm gonna ding the music a little bit because I'm not mad on the score actually.
Okay, well we'll leave that for a second because they play most of this scene out with no music. The vast majority.
Sorry, when De Palma's panning back and forth,
Mm.
we don't even see the third guy. He just comes out of nowhere, just comes out the staircase, just comes into frame from the right, enters right with a gun, and I just love that. I think it's great.
I love that. Sorry, that split diopter shot just before that as well, when Tony and the Colombian are inside the room, and they've got that big kind of spacious singles between the two of them, standing. Tony standing in front of the bathroom, and the Colombian guy standing at the front door, and they it's quite a wide framing, so there's a lot of just sort of dead space around them. But behind the Colombian, you have that split diopter shot right down the middle, and you have Angel standing very nervously on the landing, and it's from that you transition out to the shot of this gun just appearing behind his head.
It's wonderful stuff because he's so vulnerable in that shot visually, so you're immediately on edge. But what he does really well is that he orientates the audience, so everyone knows where everyone is, and even if you might not have registered, you know that there's showers there because you've seen it. It's in the background. It's not really in your focus.
Yeah, well, that's it. It's in Tony's one shot. It's right behind him.
Yeah, and so everything's set up. You know where Manny and Chi-Chi are in the car because he's shown you. So you know that rescue is there, but they're distracted, and
Yeah.
it's really really well set.
Also, he blasts the horn at the blonde woman walking past at like just that perfect time to drag us.
Yeah, to pull us out of it.
Out of the scene and back down to the street level. It's like that high wire tension that they keep in it is
yeah, it's wonderful stuff. Did you expect him to pull out the chainsaw?
I must admit, the chainsaw, I did know there was a chainsaw in it. However, it's pretty jarring.
Comes out of nowhere though, right? Like, so normally for a gangster film, you know, it's guns. Maybe I'm just thinking like in The Godfather, you know, people get garroted, but chainsaw. The only film you can think of is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. At this point, when you've got a chainsaw being wielded,
I can only imagine what a jolt that must have been to see something like that at this time, like in a film like this is. I mean, still watching it now, like it is a brutal sequence to get through.
It is brutal, isn't it? But I love the way that that he pans down and kind of, you don't see it, so it's left up to your imagination. And I see a lot of Tarantino in De Palma's work. So that whole scene, watching it again, just reminded me of the ear cutting scene in Reservoir Dogs. It's the same thing, you know, the setup and then the cutting away, the hearing of the sound. So he's aping De Palma.
Yeah, I can imagine him as a massive De Palma acolyte.
But I love the way that he just pans down. You see the eyes and you see the blood, and even when the blood's splurting, it was a little touch. But Al Pacino just puts his face behind the shower curtain as he gets splattered.
Yeah,
it's a wonderful little touch, and I don't really know what it really means, other than he just didn't want to get covered in blood. But it was great.
Yeah, there's a couple of moments. There's one just after there's that instant where all hell breaks loose and everyone pulls out guns on them, and Tony gets grabbed by the lead Colombian gangster and just shoved back onto like a little desk drawer thing, and he's sitting on it, and his face just goes really slack.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say it was his face. It's his whole body, just limp.
Yeah, it's a strange reaction, and it's fascinating.
Well, it's like it's an acceptance of what's happening, but it also demonstrates that he can deal with this. And in fact, the opening scene when we're introduced to Tony, he's been interrogated by the immigration officers, and we can see him again cool under pressure. you know, he's spinning the lies about him not being a criminal and whatnot, but he's able to.
He keeps trying to keep eye
Yeah,
contact. He keeps trying to catch somebody's eye to joke with them. It's really interesting.
we know that he can deal with pressure, the way it's shot.
Yeah.
There's multiple people in the room, and he's at total ease. And I think this is the same thing's being told to us. The same information's being doled out. Yeah, he can deal with adverse pressure and interrogation. So at no point when he sees his friend Angel being chopped up, and then he gets tied up, you know he's not going to give up the money. If anything, his defiance and his kind of flagrant regard for authority is throughout the whole film, but we see it most here. He just spits at the guy and says, "Oh, fuck you."
I mean, at this point, yeah, I mean, he is our protagonist. Like, you know, this isn't a film that is about the hunt and capture of a bad criminal. It's about a guy doing this. So it's always interesting to make films about anti-heroes or villains as protagonists, or ostensibly villains as protagonists. And there's a point later on which makes this really abundantly clear in the restaurant scene towards the end.
But he shouldn't be, right, Devlin? He shouldn't really be the hero.
No, exactly.
There's an old adage when it comes down to gangster films and criminals. You know, audience members from way back, from Howard Hawks' 1930s, been fascinated with these types of characters.
Yeah.
You know, partly because they do the things that we wish we could do.
Yeah.
You know, they're able to put aside sort of the moral issues that restrict us from making those kind of decisions. You know, I would never become a drug dealer because I've got a moral kind of obligation to be like, no, I couldn't do that. I couldn't destroy another human being's life by dealing drugs.
I'm really bad at maths as well. So
yeah, and that is terrible. Although you don't need to be very good at maths.
No.
No, they've got a machine for it. It's in the film.
Oh yeah. No, you're right.
It doesn't count it, right? It's like $1,500 short. But yeah, but that's their fascination, is they're able to do that, and they're able to be, and they're normally really charismatic. And Al Pacino is really charismatic, and Tony Montana is really charismatic, and he's even charismatic in this scene when he's being faced with a horrific death. And one of the things that De Palma mentioned about the film is that he wanted the violence to be real. He wanted it to be visceral. He wanted it to be, this is how it really is. And what I also love, is so when Manny and Chi-Chi realize that Tony and Angel haven't come back in a while, they sort of shoot up the place. Some Colombians get shot. Manny gets shot. The guy with the chainsaw, comically, the chainsaw gets shot and sort of does a little spin, which is great. And then and this is brilliant, he just jumps out of a window.
He chainsaws a window down and then jumps out of it whilst fucking himself up.
It's brilliant. And he's in like I wouldn't even say the worst golf gear you've ever seen. It is brilliant. Yeah. He just flies out the window.
Is he wearing like a mustard colored velour tracksuit?
He's got mustard on mustard.
Yeah.
It's a big no-no. But what I love is how, you know, the violence is spilled out onto the street. You know, he's like limping with this chainsaw, bloodied, and then Tony just chases him down. You know, he's like, get the yeyo. And then in front of everybody, just shoots them. Read into it all you want, like I said, about the violence of the crime wave spilling out onto the streets of Miami. To me, this just shows, again, how one of Tony's great strengths is he's willing to go there. He's willing to go to that next step where others wouldn't. And that's what kind of makes him the leader of this kind of pact of friends he's got. Him, Manny, little Chi-Chi. I call him that because I know it from IMDb, but I don't think he's actually ever called Chi-Chi. Maybe one.
No, this was an interesting one, that a lot of these secondary characters, first time I watched it, I was catching names every now and then. Like at one point, Elvira says Nicky the pig.
Yeah, and I think that's supposed to be the fat guy with the mustache, right?
Yeah, because the second time I watched it, it's like, yeah, it's Nicky. But it's
I don't think
its
they ever
characters
call it
is
that,
no. She
because,
says it.
the way that they've cast these secondary characters is they've all got something about them that makes them recognizable, and it does a good job in that respect. Little Chi Chi wears silly hats.
He
Angel
does.
wears these crazy flashy. I mean, he also just gets chopped up really quick. But he's in it pink on pink, so you are
Yep.
immediately like, wow, who's that guy?
But I think that comes under this idea that again, like as much as I think the Colombian scene is my hands down favorite scene in the film. I think the scene that tips its hand the most as to what this film is actually about is towards the very
It's
very
played
end
for
of the
laughs.
second act,
It's great.
which is where Tony has achieved everything and is desperately unhappy, almost unconscious, drunk in a restaurant with a wife that hates him, talking about how he's the bad guy. But at this point, he's indicting everyone around him. He says, "You're not the good guys." And this is after he's spoken to his bank manager, he's a kind of, during the montage, you see Tony dropping off 2 successive big shipments of cash. The first time, the bank manager is standing at the window with this big grin on his face. Second time, he has the concerned look. Yeah, but I love that even in this stupid montage, which it is, the control of the doling out of information that De Palma has, it's like he still knows what he's got to tell you. He still knows what you as an audience need to know to get you to the next part, which is fantastic, because once you come out of that montage, you then meet this bank manager, and he's very oily and he's very kind of surface level charming, but he's a scumbag as well, and he's happy to profit off the drug trade up until the point that it starts to cause him trouble. And it's not that he's going to stop, it's just that he, like everyone, like Mel the cop from Ghostbusters 2, like everyone, all these authority figures, the actual infrastructure of the United States itself is being indicted, that there are no good guys, there are just bad guys who have established themselves long enough to be considered, the good guys because they've written it into laws, or they've immunized themselves. So I would say that Frank, being a cheerful and chipper guy who seems to, like you say, have some sort of code, which is that his idea is that he just wants to bring in the drugs and he wants to have his operation, and that he doesn't want to let greed take him over, because he says it's the guys who make out of this business are the guys that fly straight under the radar. So yeah, I think like Frank fulfills his role in that they're all villains.
He goes to Frank's house. He meets Frank. Frank recruits him, and this is where we meet Elvira or Elvira.
I would say Elvira because of Elvira's movie mystery, but her name, the pronunciation of her name changes depending on who's saying it.
But she comes down, and she comes down from massively fake. But she comes down like she's descending from the heavens, and the reason why I was like, we're getting some real heavenly symbolism is the music is telling me this too, because it's chiming away in this kind of floaty airiness, and also Michelle Pfeiffer's unnaturally got her hands pressed up against the elevator either side of the door, almost creating wings. But it's very nicely done, and she comes down, and I got a question for you, because her character, it's not that she's problematic, but she doesn't really serve that much of a purpose in the film, or does she? Because as part of Tony's sort of ambition and he sort of seeks out the American dream, is she just another part of that American dream? She's very white, very blonde. She's from Middle America.
Well, Baltimore.
Baltimore. Okay, is that North?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna go Middle America.
That's fine. It's not New York and it's not LA.
Yeah,
It's
it's in
in
the
the
middle.
middle.
But yeah. So how did you interpret her character and her purpose really in the film? Because Tony immediately when he's at Frank's house is we get the sense that right he wants her. Whether or not he's in love with her, I don't know. But he looks at her, and the music tells us that he wants her. Why?
Yeah. Um, it's odd. She is, um, I guess maybe she represents another form of attainment.
No, I
She's just
definitely think she does.
Yeah,
But
she's another trapping that he needs to get. He's also, I mean, it seems that she's certainly one of the first women that he directly interacts with. Um, he doesn't seem interested um, during the Miami Beach sequence when they're off to the Colombian deal. Everyone
or
else is talking about the girls, and he is
yeah,
fixed on the
or
job.
even when Manny shows him the tongue trick, he doesn't really seem that interested in the
Yeah,
woman
that's
because he
true,
talks
and
about
that's a little
getting
later,
money
though, right?
first.
That's after they've
Oh
started
no, you're
working with
right.
Frank.
Yeah, you are right. Yeah,
It's,
you are right.
So it's unusual. It seems that he does, but um, her introduction, like you say, yeah, is this kind of angelic. You know, she gets the Marauder synths, and she comes down in the elevator, and she swishes into the room, but then she's immediately like a dick to everyone.
Yeah, she
So
looks so uninterested in everything in the film,
yeah,
uh, which makes me wonder really what is her purpose in the script
hmm, yeah,
because she doesn't really fulfill anything other than, like you said, another thing for Tony to possess, to seek. And then
yeah,
once he gets her, they 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 talk in they reference having a child slightly. It didn't really go anywhere. They just
yes,
he mentions that she's done so much drugs that her womb is polluted.
yeah.
But apart from that, it doesn't really go anywhere. And then after that restaurant scene, she just leaves the film.
He's constantly asking people about her. I think it's so in that sense it's another betrayal, and it's another thing that's pushing him uh off the cliff towards just the outright monster that he becomes by the end.
Yeah, I suppose so. I never looked at it that way.
Because he is
I mean, she,
he is obsessive
yeah.
about finding her, and after the assassination in New York goes wrong, he sends a message through Nikki or one of the other underlings to say, tell her I love her. But he just says it like that. Tell her I love her. So yeah, whether the suggestion is that his lust for everything can't really be passed out one thing from the other. So rather than person to person human affection, he considers that to just be another thing that he needs to get, which he kind of references again in that restaurant scene. He's talking about
Yeah.
that he's going to be 50 with a sack for a belly, and is this what we worked for? So we could sit here and eat this shit amongst all of these rich old mummies, which is some great extras casting, by the way.
Yeah, it
It's
was. Having worked on Emmerdale, it looked like the extras from Emmerdale
it's
had
the
been
the
drafted in.
waspiest restaurant that ever existed, and it's great. Everyone looks like
Old and white.
everyone looks like Margaret Dumont, from the Marx Brothers movies. Just they're all so everyone's monocles are dropping one after another. You can just hear them. But during that sequence, he's talking about, is this what we do? And he's like, do we just eat this food and we drink this? Eating, fucking. And he just gathers it all up as just things. So maybe that's why she's there, and this idea that, how desperately tragic it must be to be an object.
Mm.
Because that's how we end the silly montage, right? We end the excess built on excess built on excess montage, and we see Tony's empire growing and growing and growing, and then it finishes with an ominous synth chord and her doing like 15 bumps of coke in a row, I think.
Well, she looks like she could do with a good meal.
Yeah,
Michelle Pfeiffer
especially
is
in
very gaunt,
yeah.
very.
I
She doesn't look healthy in the film.
No, I think they I think that's very much intentional.
Purposely.
Yeah, there's
Yeah, it's
you
very
can
purposely.
tell that they've contoured her face with makeup in that restaurant sequence to make her cheeks look really sallow and
Mhm.
and sunken. So yeah, it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one in terms of what she should be representing. I think this is going to be quite a common theme because we're going to be looking at a lot of films from the same sort of era here, 80s and 90s. The sidelining, or sometimes not even sidelining, just scripts don't seem to know what to do with female characters sometimes. They know they need one. They need them for a few key sequences, but then they just let these characters just sort of slosh around in the background the rest of the time. She's probably only on screen like 4 times. Yeah. There's a nod in the dialogue that she's reclaiming her self-worth by no, I'm leaving alone, and it is the first time in the film that she makes a decision that's not based around the two men that are keeping her on as a trophy.
One of the themes, 100%, 1983, is excess and the 80s and the Babylon Club. Thoughts on the Babylon Club? Because we spend quite a bit of time actually, film minutes in the Babylon Club. I really liked it. Just the pinks and the way that the whites come off the sort of the neon, the mirrors. I really liked it, but I think I'm liking it, and I shouldn't because I think it's supposed to be garish and horrible and a reflection of uh, how excess and materialism has caused us to become vapid. That's me getting real deep, but I quite like the music and I quite like the aesthetic. And I've been to Miami, and I didn't see anyone dressed like that, which is a shame. But I wanted to dress like that really bad.
Yeah, when you were talking about the club and especially that pink neon aesthetic, I was thinking pink and pale blue aesthetic. That's what you think of when you think of Miami, and I was wondering whether this is the film that codified that.
What, that codified Miami Vice?
Yeah, basically Miami Vice, and then subsequently, I mean, obviously Vice City, and but yeah, the sort of the permanent sunset, the really kind of vibrant neon reddy purple sunsets, whitewashed nightclubs with pink and blue neon lights, and um, lots of very trashy synth scores, and I think this film might be the one that single-handedly created that aesthetic, right? In my head, there is another film starring Eric Roberts set in Miami. What am I thinking of? What is this? Do you know what I could be talking about? Some sort of Eric Roberts Miami-based film?
Are you thinking about the one with Alec Baldwin?
Maybe.
Heavens, something with Terry Hatcher. No, that's Florida. No, sorry, I know that's in bloody Miami. Christ, no, that's in Carolina. No, I have no idea. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not huge on Eric Roberts. He's not my
Really?
favorite. He's not my favorite Roberts. I
So
prefer Emma Roberts of Scream 4 fame. Yeah.
Okay, good. But that means that you've not seen A Talking Cat in Bang.
No, I haven't.
Have you not seen? You've not seen A Talking Cat?
You know when I gave up on Eric Roberts? When Sly Stallone and James Woods tried to blow him up.
You know what? That's what I'm thinking of. Is it Assassins?
No, but it's close. It's The Specialists, where you get
The
to see Sly
Specialist.
Stallone's sweet ass as he's banging Sharon Stone in the shower in a very
it's
awkwardly
so
blocked scene.
unconvincing. Neither of them want to be there, but both of them want to show their best side to camera, so they're just having a little wrestle to see who gets to.
Poor Sharon
Yeah.
Stone. She's like, where is Michael Douglas when I need him? I've got Sly Stallone's ass thrusting me. The Specialist.
Yep. Okay. Well, absolutely nailed that one, didn't we?
Yeah, that's a future episode.
We got you, Eric Roberts. Great. So moving on.
I think he's got cornrows in them as well. He's got cornrows
Oh
in
my
that film.
God. You know, I really liked his Spun. Do you ever see Spun?
No, I just told you, Eric Roberts is not my thing, baby.
I
I'm
know,
not
but
gonna watch it.
he's in Spun for like 6 or 7 minutes. It's a Jonas Åkerlund film.
I don't care whose film it is.
Right. It's Jason Schwartzman and Mena Suvari are the lead cast members, and John Leguizamo.
Oh, Mina. Well, okay, you've got my attention then. I like her.
You had my interest. Now you have my attention.
Very good. But you know what? We were talking about the aesthetic, the soundtrack, which since choosing the film, I've been listening to on runs and just generally just listening to it at work.
Yeah.
I really like the soundtrack, but when you listen to the songs back to back, it becomes very apparent that they all sound exactly the bloody same.
Yeah.
And I do think that that is a purpose creative choice. They've got Debbie Harry doing the Rush Rush to the Yeyo.
Yes.
Which is a wonderful song.
Which
is a wonderful song, which is why I picked it for the intro.
Yeah, the tremendously and appropriately indulgent intro.
So all the songs sound the same, and I do think that this is a purposely creative choice to kind of make it have a dig at kind of pop music or popular music of the times, and how just interchangeable it is, and the lyrics are all very simplistic, the beats are all the same, and it all fits into this idea of excess. And they even call it out in the film. Frank, in the first Babylon scene, orders a bottle of champagne, and he's like, was he like $1,200 for a bunch of fucking grapes? What do you think? What do you think of that, Tony? So they are fully aware of it, and it's in the script. And we mentioned it before about Oliver Stone. He doesn't do subtlety. De Palma, he sometimes he does, but I think they are telling us, and it refers back to what I was saying before about the rappers and maybe misappropriating the material. And I think you're right. I think they just cherry pick the bits that suit what they're trying to push. But a bit like Wall Street and the bankers that then follow it, and then those people that follow like the Wolf of Wall Street now, like, yeah, great film. Scarface is reflecting a time and a period that actually was a bit naff. And they're saying that whilst also pretending to have fun, because Michelle Pfeiffer, when she's dancing, is having no fun.
Yeah. Oh, it looks like an aerobics workout.
Yeah, it does. But Jane Fonda smiled when she did a workout. I know.
Yeah.
I've done it.
You've watched several.
I've done it.
Imagine.
It's very tough on the glutes.
But I'm sure it'll all pay off.
Oh, it does, man. I've got a sweet, sweet trunk. A bit like Slice and The Specialist. I was actually his ass double. I was like Joey Tribbiani and Friends. I got asked.
Wait, wasn't that like 1996?
Yeah, I had an ass like a 10-year-old boy. Because I was 10. What have we done? We've completely gone off on one.
Right. So what happens in this film, right? What does happen in this fucking film?
Should we move on from the Babylon Club? Let's.
Okay, we can.
Okay. All we see really in these opening scenes in the Babylon Club is that the cogs are turning. Like, he's listening to Frank talking about the rules in which he'll break later on in the film, about not underestimating the other man's greed and don't get high on your own supply. But he's not really listening. He's just taking it all in. I can rule all of this, and he even says it in the next scene. And I love his I wouldn't say his naivety, but his just like belligerence. He's like, she likes me. He's in the car with Manny, and he's like, she likes me, and he's referring to Alvira. Where he gets she likes him from, I don't know, but I love his just like dogmaticness of like, yeah. It's in the eyes, Chico. He's convincing himself that she's into him. Why would she be into him? I don't think she is into him, but I love that that's his approach, which is no, she's into me. She likes me. But from this, Devlin, we're going to move to. Now, I'm not going to say problematic.
Are you not?
I'm going to say interesting because
Oh,
that's
I thought
that's.
maybe you'd gone for a thesaurus.
No. I don't have a thesaurus. I only know problematic and interesting. They're my only descriptors.
Fair play.
Gina. Tony goes
Yeah.
to once he becomes a success. So it's like 3 months later, and he's now one of he's one of the trusted members of Frank's organization. He goes to see his little sister and his mother, and I quite like this scene actually. Interestingly, the actress who plays his mother is like 4 years older than Pacino. That's a tough paper round.
Really?
Gosh, she looks like she's she looks like she's about 20 years older than Pacino. I know Pacino is a star at this point, but
But
they can do wonders, can't they, with
I
makeup?
guess the ages are really interesting. I was surprised, not so much to find out how old he is in this, because you can see that this is kind of like we said, this is a transitional role for him. This is, this is middle-aged shouty Pacino's first outing. But he does seem to believably age in the film, um, from those early sequences in
Yeah, they do
Freedom Town.
little subtle things with his hair.
The hair especially, yeah.
Yeah,
What
like
I
they
was
put some
surprised by
highlights on.
was how much older he looked in this than he did just 3 years earlier in Cruising. I looked up; he's 43 in this, which meant he
Yeah, it's
was
crazy, isn't it?
which meant
It's
he was
crazy to think.
40 in Cruising, but he could easily pass for the early 30s in that, because the character kind of demands him to be, you know, like a young, slightly impressionable guy.
I think he's got that knack, a bit like Kurt Russell, of being able to grow an incredible beard, which has helped him in certain roles. So in Serpico, he looks older because he's got a great big
Yeah,
bushy beard.
that's true. He would have been young in Serpico too, right?
I know he would have been young, but he looks older than he
Yeah.
should be, and he
So
wears one of those silly fisherman hats.
yes. Yeah, well, that's weird. And also that Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio is
Yeah, I'm glad you said it. It took me a while in the intro to get that one right.
it's it's tough one. She's what, 18, 19, 20, 19, I think, at the point that we first meet her, and
She represents the troublesome side of De Palma because she basically has got not all the boobs out, but she's risque throughout the whole film. And this is to talk about her entire character.
yes.
It was not our intention to put two back-to-back incestual storylines in the first two episodes of this podcast series, but it just so happened to be that I completely forgot all of this when I picked Scarface.
Well, and also that I hadn't seen Frankenstein in so long that I forgot that was weird. So
All I hope is that the choice that you make at the end of this episode does not involve brother and sisterly love. It's getting a little bit strange.
let's find out. Let's find out.
Well, we'll find out, won't we? But so Tony and Gina. This is the one aspect of the film that I really did struggle with as far as what is the deeper meaning. The film
Yeah.
tells us, and it's actually it's probably one of my big dings against the film is I actually hate the scene when Manny pretty much just tells us why Tony acts the way he does with Gina. He says, "Oh, he's overprotective of you. He's the older brother.
Oh,
It's because
after the bathroom slap.
yeah, you're the only thing that's pure in his life." And I'm like, no, this script has been so good and so smart throughout this whole film, and now you're going to go to that level where you're just going to tell us. And to me, that feels like that was the moment where they thought in this particular storyline they weren't too confident with whether or not it was being portrayed that way, so they just went out and said it, just went, yeah, this is why Tony is the way he is. But I was hoping to find something deeper. I mean, what were your thoughts between Tony and Gina and what that actually meant?
Do you think much like how Elvira's character can be reduced to Tony having a voracious need for things, of whatever that may be, he needs more things, and so Elvira represents, because he sees her as very glamorous and that she belongs to somebody whose position he seeks to usurp. Um, at the point where we see Gina in the club for the first time, when she's dancing with the low level gangster, and she goes to the bathroom and he flies into a rage because he sees her get he's getting handsy, and obviously later in the film that she says that that's because he has
He looks just like
inappropriate
Manny.
feelings towards her, and then she tries to shoot him, does shoot him successfully. It
doesn't really go anywhere, does it? It's implied, but even the implication of what's being said doesn't really. We talked a lot and given credit to Oliver Stone's script, but this is probably the one storyline where I like, even though it's tragic, and I was sad for Manny the way he gets killed, and I liked that character. I like the fact that I was so emotionally invested in him that it really hit me hard when he gets killed. And so you could argue that it's worth having that through line to have that payoff at the end, but maybe don't make it so explicit that potentially there's a sexual element
the
between
dad
the
was
relationship,
kind of
as
dead
opposed
for
to
it.
a paternal one, which is in the early scenes feels like it's a paternal thing. They mention in very, very passing, blink and you miss it. The dad, it says about, you're not like Papa. It's like, we never had a dad. So I get I get that straight away. And even the dynamic between Tony and Manny feels like older brother, younger brother. But so there's a Shakespearean tragic love story being woven. But the idea that Gina thinks that maybe Tony, wants her sexually, I wish they'd just got rid of that. I can't. I didn't need it, and it didn't really. And the fact that I didn't need it is because I don't think any of it really paid off. But what I was hoping was that you could maybe shed some light on it. But clearly, I think you were as bamboozled as I was with it.
Yeah, basically, it was a plot that was just sort of there, and that I could scramble around to try and find meaning for, but it didn't strike.
There isn't any really. We're searching, aren't we? We're properly searching. I will say this as well. I'll not happy with the way that Stone's written that particular subplot. I'm also just not happy with the score every time.
Yeah, well, it's not really a score, is it? It's
No, it's not really. But then I checked out this guy, and I've forgotten
Giorgio
his name.
Moroder. He's very famous.
He very famous. He's been involved in some of the best songs ever written.
Yeah,
I couldn't believe it. He's worked with basically everybody. But this score, I've given De Palma great credit in this film, but the use of the score music just undercuts so much of the good work that he's doing visually, because audibly it's like being hit in the face. Tony is now he doesn't like it when people touch his little sister's ass. It's like, I don't need this. It's almost like the Clockwork Orange score, but it doesn't fit in this film because we're getting this wonderful pop music and this wonderful kind of sheen and aesthetic being shown visually, and then we just get this real dour, oppressive score, and it doesn't. It jars with me, and I don't like it.
But it's a weird score in that other times it's kind of a little upbeat and funky, and but it feels like a temp score. It feels like somebody's gone in, and because it's repeated themes, but the themes aren't adapted to fit the scene, so they're just kind of dumped on top.
The best parts of the film are the bits where they use the original music, the original songs. Sorry. Whereas every time the score comes in, like I said, it's like a sledgehammer coming in, and this is what you should feel right now, and this is what this scene represents. And it was the parts that I really, really disliked, and it also hugely dates the film as well.
Very much.
you could, you make the same argument of, Terminator, the original Terminator, but in that the music is a character, and in this, it just like you said, it feels like a temp score, feels like something you would write
Yeah.
in just to, you know, give some atmosphere while you're going
Yeah.
through the dailies.
And it's not the instrument, it's not the synths themselves, and it's not the
No,
texture that stands
I
out
quite like
because
MIDI scores. There's
yeah,
plenty of
this
them I like.
I mean there's what, an entire massive synth wave revival that's been going on for several years now, which is
Yeah,
uh
even artists like Daft Punk, this is the
yeah,
area that they work within. So it can be done well. I just don't think it's done
yeah.
very well here.
I mean
Even though
specifically
this guy has, Electric Dreams. This guy's
yeah,
been responsible for some great tracks. I think
yeah.
he wrote "Push It to the Limit." He's
It's
got.
it would make sense. But yeah, this is so it's not the music. There's this guy Carpenter Brute. He's French, and even though his name is Carpenter Brute, and obviously he would be obsessed with John Carpenter, I think his stuff sounds a lot more like Giorgio Moroder stuff. And it's he does a lot of 80s genre film inflected music for imaginary films. It's that for a guy who seems to have a handle on melody, the score is very amelodic, or it's not. It's memorable because there's bits of it stuck in my head right now, but it's not. Where John Carpenter makes scores, and his scores are there to create a tonal and a textural like atmosphere that drags you in through a scene. And Carpenter always talks about just doing the bare minimum to get you through a scene.
Yeah, I mean that he's stated it many times, hasn't he? That he writes his own score music because he just sees it as not window dressing, but it's just there to
I
service
think
the
he actually
plot.
calls it wallpaper.
Yeah, wallpaper,
Yeah.
not so. Yeah,
Whereas this, I don't know, because it's heavy. Like it comes in and
it's
it hits you, and
it takes over the
yeah,
scenes. At times, you're like, oh God, just get a better score,
yeah,
and we're back in. It pulls me out of the film. It really does. At times, especially the Gina scenes
mm,
when Tony's and Pacino's doing a really good job with his performance. I don't need
yeah,
the music to tell me that at this moment Tony's going into dark places.
yeah. You know what it's like
It-
is Twin Peaks, because Angelo Badalamenti just created the music for Twin Peaks, and he created a series of themes around um emotional uh, ideas or emotional cause, and then Lynch or Mark Frost or whoever was directing that episode at the time would just drag and drop the score on top. And the thing that works with Twin Peaks though is that Twin Peaks is really off kilter, and especially that first two series were um, almost played as if they were sort of a twisted version of a daytime soap opera. So it makes sense that at the end of a scene, you have this very heavy handed little piece of score music that tells you exactly how you should be feeling at that moment. But when they do it in Twin Peaks, they're doing it somewhat ironically. Whereas,
Mm.
yeah, the problem that Scarface has is that it feels like that's quite po-faced. And yeah, you're right. It detracts from the hard work that the very capable cast are doing.
But I wanted to mention something that comes up constantly in the whole film, and that's the portrait of paradise, or
Yeah.
what I think is the symbol of the dream. It juxtaposes every scene that we have where there's violence and there's death and there's consequences. So in the Colombian scene, when Tony walks in, there's a huge, well, it's not huge, but it's really prominent in the shot in the three shot actually, because you've got the lady on the bed with a sort of sunrise paradise portrait. And then when Tony kills Frank and the judge who killed the Scolari brothers in Ghostbusters, that entire wall is, and the only reason why I say that now is because I remembered what their name was, and it was the Scolari brothers. Um, when he kills Frank and I can't remember what his name is. It's like Bernstein or something like that.
Well, I like that the first time you see that is after he gets his green card and they realize that they're out and they're free in America, and you have that big shot of the beautiful purple hazy skyline, and then the camera pulls away and it's a poster, and then the camera pans down, and they're in the van, and that's another one
And
of
they're in
those
the rat
things.
van. Yeah.
Yeah.
The cost of paradise.
As well as like the symbolism of that, I really love the way De Palma uses the space kind of three-dimensionally. We talked about Kenneth Branagh's inability to move his camera in a way that created interesting stuff, and it's because I think his production design, there was nothing there for him to shoot at. We said that it's just one big square room with a stupid staircase at the back. But clearly De Palma, his cinematographer and his production designer, worked very hard to make sure that there was this vast three-dimensional space for them to move around at all times. So the angle that truck is at, the angle that it's at to the club and to the poster is just, it's great. The perspective is always shifting as it comes down, because the back end of the film is where it starts to really kind of barrel through.
Oh, it's quick. It is quick, isn't it? As soon as we get to so Frank's dead, and Tony takes over, we have the montage, which a bit of an 80s trope, and I think Rocky 4 pretty much ruined the montage for everybody, because that
Ruined
film...
or perfected?
Oh, it depends on your perspective. I mean, I quite like Rocky 4, but that's because I quite like watching
Crap.
a film in entire montage.
No, it's not crap. It is what it is. It's the pinnacle of what exactly that particular type of cinema is.
It is, and it will also break you if you let it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think Rocky 4 has some questions to answer with regards to its use of the montage. But in '83, yeah, it's already a trope. But I think De Palma, like you've mentioned before, he manages to delve out a lot of information. And actually, the film itself is not really interested in Tony establishing his empire. They're more interested in how him gaining success and achieving his goals has actually affected him in a negative way, and that's what they're really more interested in. So that's why they choose to just show this all in a montage. You know, he marries Elvira, he buys Gina the salon because earlier in the film she's a hairdresser. He he builds his mansion, and this is again referring to his lack of class. He's got a huge portrait of him and Elvira, and it looks terrible. We've got this gaudy, horrible blood red on the walls with black and gold, and the art.
Am I right in thinking that the first time we see that lobby in all its glory is in the end of the film?
Yeah. No, I think
So I don't remember seeing it before.
As far as a
big one.
Yeah, a big establishing shot. Yeah, it's right at the end, but we do get a sense of what inside the mansion looks like from just several different shots of
his bathtub.
lobby, his bathtub, and what I like about the art direction in the film is how the way Tony has done his mansion to the way Frank did his. Frank's was quite minimalistic, glass. He was quite transparent. All parts of the living space was open to the elements. You could look in, but his bar was minimalistic. Everything was small. Again, very quite Clockwork Orange. Pure whites, bits of sporadic art, but nothing too showy. Tony, it's all about empire building. So he's got these Greek pillars with very, well, you could say Greek and Roman architecture throughout, and it's all feeding us that information that this is somebody who's wanting to create some form of, I guess, legacy or empire, but he just doesn't have the class, and it just comes off quite tacky. If you were in DFS or The Range or any number of homeware shops, this is the section connection with the diamond
Yeah.
encrusted tiger or the diamond encrusted Black Panther that only somebody from, and I don't want to stereotype, but from say Essex or
Ah, I was hoping you were going to get super specific and slag off one very small part of Staffordshire.
sorry to disappoint Devlin, I stay true to my roots.
Yeah, I must admit I hadn't really I hadn't thought about that, but it's a very good point. Yeah, especially that big contrast, red and black and white and transparent. It's
Shall we talk about a character that's becomes quite important
yeah.
in the final act? He's pretty much the instigator of Tony's demise. Souza. He's an interesting character, and I don't know the actor. And I looked at his IMDb, and
Yes.
he's a sporadic kind of character actor, but relatively small. But I think he's really good in this film.
Yeah.
He's really charming. In the opening scene, when Tony meets him with Omar, and he accuses him of being an informant and kills him outright, he's very charming. A little bit again of the film telling us exactly what he is, but it's shorthanded, is what it is. They mentioned that he was educated in Oxford and he's not your stereotypical drug dealer. But I think you get that without that exposition anyway. Just because I think the actor does a really good job, and the script, the way he talks, the way he interacts with Tony, he's constantly looking at him with, I wouldn't say disapproval, but there's a sense of you're not part of my social circle, but I have to do business with you, and
Yeah.
that's what he.
So he's gonna use him for his
And
own
I
ends.
get that.
He feels
I
that he
get
can
that
read
from
it.
the actor's performance, and I think he does a really good job. And he's called out. Frank actually calls everything right in the film. He says he'll stab you in the
Yeah.
back. Literally does. Not without stabbing him, but still, it's in the back. He's a snake in the grass, so to speak. But he also says quite clearly to Tony, "Do not fuck me, Tony."
No, everyone doesn't want anyone to fuck anyone.
That's my Bolivian accent there.
There's a couple of repeated phrases. People don't want to fuck.
No.
Everyone wants to talk about their balls, and a lot of people want to know whether another person can stick their whole head up their ass.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm keeping some of those for the ending, I think. But he's an interesting character, and so to move it along after Tony's got his success, and it's going to lead into the scene that I know that you want to talk about the most in this final act. Tony gets caught laundering money.
Yep.
We see again that whole idea that rich people are the tightest people in the world. He's squabbling over $1,500.
Yeah.
Which is over $1,500 in a pot that's like 283,000. It's like, really? Wow. Okay. There's a lovely scene. It's only short, but this is Oliver Stone, I think, having a poke at those that protect the rich and powerful. The lawyer, where he's
Yeah.
like trying to tell Tony, listen, you're gonna have to do a bit of time for this. And there's another way he's like, he does the guy from Die Hard. He basically says like, "Honey, baby."
Yeah, there's a lot of he does
I
it.
can't. He does it right. He does the honey baby right.
He
It's
does
the same
that.
line.
The bank manager pulls it on him as well. He calls him like Tony,
It's
baby.
like the go-to. It's like the go-to '80s thing is to be like, listen, baby.
Yeah.
But this is the way he's like, honey, baby. I'm the king of reasonable doubt. But when you got $1.3 million in front of you, it's hard to convince a jury.
Yeah.
But I do like that. But essentially, Tony's going to face some jail time, and this is the part of the film where if you're with Tony, which you should be, because the whole film has been predicated on him being our anti-hero protagonist. However you want to view him, he's our main character. You're thinking, just take the 3 years in jail and you'll be fine. But he doesn't want to do
Yeah.
it. And he feels like he's forced the whole film. He's been against authority. He's been a complete. He he goes against anybody who tries to dictate to Tony Montana. He rejects. He pushes away.
Yeah.
He tells him to basically fuck you.
Based on how
But
much
he knows he's under the.
yeah.
He knows.
I was just going to say based on how much
He knows he's under the cosh.
based on how much he hated being under communist rule. This is set up in the
Yes,
start.
exactly.
Like again, it's
set
all
up
there.
set up right at the beginning.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning. You're absolutely right. And but he feels like he has to fall under Sousa, and Sousa asks him to help out with an assassination of some Bolivian journalist who's spouting out, basically calling out the major players within the drug trade organization. So Sousa wants him dead, and I do like the way that Tony, because it's like a hard cut from Tony being asked to help out, and he does sort of say, "Will you help us, Tony?" But again, in a very kind of charming, it's "Will you help?"
Yeah.
You are going to help. And it cuts straight to the restaurant scene, which I know you want to talk about. So,
well, we already
go ahead, Devlin. Talk about it.
Do it, I dare you. We'd already kind of spoken quite a bit about it, which is, I just wanted to sort of reiterate that I think that it clarifies the themes of there are levels of villainy and everyone is unclean. Everyone's implicated. It's the same thing as the journalist who's I don't know if he's a journalist or an opposition politician or whoever it is that they want to assassinate at the UN. I like that they. Yeah, I don't even think they need to tell us because it doesn't matter. It's somebody going out there telling the truth, which is enough. Like we understand what risk this guy is posing to the organization and what risk he's putting himself in by putting it out there. But so he's kind of exposing that this entire government structure is complicit, and I feel like Tony's speech here is the same thing. It's in the hands of a very, very talented performer who's inhabiting a very complete character. So even though this could be considered monologuing and also it could just be somebody heavy-handedly just doling out the theme of their film at your feet, it works because it's all put together so well. It's just it's great. Just the way he starts out almost catatonically drunk. It's and he builds to this crescendo of just he's so unpleasant, but he says it throughout the whole film. Like, at least I'm honest. He's letting everyone know that this is the dirty work and that all of these people, all these wealthy people in this room, none of them got there clean. There's no such thing as clean wealth. So it's an interesting. I feel like that's, if there are themes, like big overarching themes to pick out, I feel like that's the one. And the other is that because the film is about cocaine, so it's a film sort of embodies what that drug represents. I mean, so much of the cinema we talked about, the 70s movie brat cinema directors, a great many of them went into a massive coke. Like I said, that Coppola sort of burnt out in the early 80s. That was largely massively drug based during and during and after Apocalypse Now. Yeah. Oh, ever so much. And I'm sure that probably most of the people, Scorsese as well. Scorsese almost killed himself, right? During the sort of Raging Bull era. I believe he almost died.
Yeah. I think it was one of the reasons why he decided to go and do Last Temptation of Christ, was some sort of redemptive opportunity to artistically dispel all that hateful shit that he'd gone through with his drug addiction. Yeah.
Yeah, and so maybe and if we're saying that De Palma was adapting the script, then I assume that this was an Oliver Stone thing, which is that much like how Stephen King worked out a lot of his personal demons through external demons. A lot of Stephen King's classic writing, especially from a specific chunk of his massive bibliography, is dedicated to him working out his addiction problems through fiction, and that maybe this is what this film is as well. So this is, you get the first hit. Do you notice when Tony does his first bump that there's a Jaws shot or the trombone shot when he's in the car with Elvira?
I did notice that, yeah. Sure. But you don't do that shot unless you mean to put some sort of implied meaning behind it.
Yeah, totally. It's a big one to pull because it's very noticeable for an audience, and it happens before he takes it. It's when he gets in the car, so it's very strange. But on second viewing, I assume that that's because that, like I said, is the first time you see him do any drugs on camera, and maybe that's like the moment, like when Bart and Milhouse do the pure sugar squishies.
Whoa, that's good.
Yeah. So now
Squishy.
we're in, and so you get the first rush, and then you get the chasing ever greater highs, and then you reach this pinnacle, but it's not enough because addiction isn't about enough. Addiction is always about more. So maybe it makes more sense that if you look at Tony's character out, not just so much about a guy who's consumed with material greed, but if you look at it more like, and he calls his wife a junkie, and he's the same. He ends the film face down in like 3 shopping bags worth of coke, just inhaling huge chunks of it. So yeah, I don't know. I would say that that's my that's I feel like this restaurant scene at the end, this is, the you've had the rush, and then you've had the soaring highs, and now this is the crash before the fiery conclusion, which addiction will end if you don't jump off the tracks when you get a chance. It will end in death.
So speaking of which, so after the restaurant, Tony makes it. Prior to that, Tony's gonna help out Sousa. Doesn't go very well. The assassination attempt on the Bolivian journalist does not go very well.
No, there's the kids in the car. Tony still has some morals left.
Yes, well, we talked earlier about the difference between The Godfather and this, and that the felt like the crime wasn't organized crime; it was chaos and dog eat dog. But this was the one element that gave you some redemptive qualities about Tony Montana, is that he's gonna say, he's like Leon, no women, no kids. So he doesn't agree with it. So he shoots the assassin, who I don't know if you recognize the actor, but he played the Pope
Oh yes.
in End of Days.
Oh, was that what you were going with? That's
I
a
was
good
going
one.
with that one. What were you going with?
Ace Ventura's landlord.
Ventura.
Yes, Satan.
Oh, you beat me to it. I went with the more obscure one, but you definitely went with the better one.
End of Days. I don't know, man. You don't get many End of Days references.
I heard them scratching around. What's with all this dog food? Oh, pet food.
Fiber.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, okay. You beat me on that one. But yeah, so Tony just kills him outright, and then like, I told you. And again, it's someone trying to tell him what to do, and he
Yeah.
just completely rebels against it, which has happened throughout the film.
Hmm.
But in this instance, he's not thinking straight. You know, he's wired up to the max. And then when he makes the phone call, he comes back. He finds out that Gina's missing, Manny's disappeared, and then his mother rings him, and so does Sousa. And this is where we're really barreling through now. I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
realize it, but the last 30 minutes are like bang, 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 bang. We haven't got time to mess around here, which again makes me think like this film is 2 hours and 50 minutes, but it doesn't feel like it. And I think it's partly because Act 3 is like 30 minutes long. It
Yeah.
just doesn't the way that the acts are split up, and this final act is short. So Sousa declares war on Tony. Don't fuck me, basically.
No.
And then Tony then goes to his mother's house, finds out the address, and here's a question: did Tony know that the address that his mother gives him is Manny's house?
Doesn't seem
Do you
like
think
it.
he knew?
Doesn't
Doesn't seem like he knew,
he
does
seems
it?
very
But it was
surprised.
yeah, he seems surprised when he answers the door, but it surprised me that he wouldn't have known that.
Well,
But I didn't know whether that was
you
because
would think that
he's coked up.
you would think that he would know where his number one lieutenant lives. Although maybe that this was a place, because they said that they only got married yesterday, so maybe this is a place that they bought new and that they just moved to. There were explanations.
No, because the mother says she followed them. That's how she knows the address.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
Mm. And he even gives a little look when the mother tells him the address in the house before he leaves. That tells me that he knew, which is why I was asking. I took it that he actually knew that was Manny, that he
Right.
maybe pieced it together. But then when he opens the door, yeah, there's that my theory kind of
Yeah.
maybe gets poo-pooed because he has enough time to contemplate what's
Yeah.
happening, and he still shoots
Well,
him.
and the synths tell you what to think.
Oh, the music tells me that Tony isn't
Yeah.
happy, and he just kills him outright. I'm genuinely gutted because I enjoy Stephen Bauer's
Mhm.
performance. I like Manny, the character. I mentioned it before about it being almost Shakespearean. It's a bit like Macbeth. You know, in Macbeth,
Oh, yeah,
he
yeah.
kills his brother. And I think the same can be said here. And there's
Well,
definitely
like Duncan, that he's the Duncan of the piece.
yeah,
Although it's a bit,
yeah.
maybe
I
it's a
think
bit, but yeah, I understand what you mean. That
I'm not saying that it's perfect,
yeah,
that theory's perfect, but there's that feeling that this was tragic, that this was the only pure relationship within the whole film. It's because I've skipped over it and we're not really mentioned it, but there's glances, and they're film glances, they're movie glances, but they tell us, the audience, that these two are really into
yeah.
each other, and actually their relationship
I
seems pure. And I think the reason why Manny doesn't tell Tony that he's seeing Gina is he's waiting to marry her so he can so he thinks that maybe he'll be more accepting of that, because throughout the whole film Manny's been portrayed as a womanizer and somebody who's just interested in the pussy. But actually in this case he is actually genuinely in love with his sister, and he thinks if he gets married to her, maybe that will be the thing that gets Tony's
Yeah.
approval. He
Yeah.
was wrong. The music told him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's yeah, this is the point at which we're reaching kind of operatic heights as well of emoting.
Yeah. We're in the full descent of this character
Yeah.
is losing all of its humanity, and we are, like I said, we as an audience member are like Manny. So when Manny gets killed, we're like, why'd you do that, Tony? And then he takes Gina against her will. She fights against him when they get back to the mansion, and we see the death squad following.
And
They're
what I
all in
meant
the
by
trees.
strange racial coding is that the death squad, despite the fact that literally everyone in this film is supposed to be from Central America, we have very, very, very Caucasian-looking leads who we're following, and then this death squad are very
They
feral-looking with the big hair and the thing, and
they look like they came off the set of Easy Rider. They're on the wrong film set.
yeah. There's what else am I thinking? Did you see there was a lot of 80s movies which were just about generic Central American baddies.
Well, the one guy
Um,
had looked like he'd been shot in the face with Homer Simpson's makeup gun. The Terminator.
yes, that's the guy. Oh, yeah. Why? I know it's the same thing that
Like
he had that
he'd been
total.
tangoed.
Yeah,
Literally been
total end of
tangoed.
level boss thing about him. But he looks Germanic, like much like maybe it's the Terminator connection, but to me he looked totally like Teutonic. But
I took it
no,
a slightly
apparently he's
different
one
way. That
big human.
he was almost, he was nameless, and he was the reason he was so generic was because it wasn't really him that killed Tony. But that was me. I'm probably reaching there. But he
I
was
see.
just very orange.
But he was, he was just death incarnate. He was karma or whatever coming for him.
Yeah, because he's very purposeful and very slow and deliberate. Anyone else would just have shot him like 50 times, but no, this was like, yeah, like I said, it felt. You're right. It's very operatic, and
Yeah.
we've mentioned the in passing the ending. Quite famous scene. Spielberg shot some of the low angle stuff of the Death Squad coming in. The
Ah.
reason why this is so and it kind of a happy accident with the whole idea of this film being just excess and more and more and more. I almost I almost went into a reference that you might not have got. It was the Naked Gun reference, more, sex, sex, sex.
Yeah, another one.
Whereas I'm staying, where you're at home with the same woman night after night,
Yeah.
over and over for the rest of your life. Anyway, that's for another throwback series.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the reason why this seems so deliberate, there's just multiple setups, is Pacino actually burnt his hand, putting it on the blank weapon,
Oh, I see.
and was out of commission for like 2 weeks. So De Palma just had 2 weeks to shoot people shooting
Oh, like
guns,
second unit.
which is why it's just so there's so much of just guns being shot and people being shot, but they're all in singles or they're all in wides, but you don't see Pacino shooting them because he wasn't there, and it was the reason why Spielberg got to direct some shots because De Palma just said, "Do you want to come along and direct
I had no idea.
some of
That's
the shots?"
cool.
And that was it. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and it just goes to show that even these major productions, they have problems, and then you just have to work around them. I don't think it affects the film in too much, but you're right. It does feel bloated. It does feel too much.
Yeah, whether it's
And
excessive.
it doesn't really bring anything extra to the film, other than we just see more violence being
Yeah.
piled upon. We get the famous line,
Yeah.
"Say hello to my little friend," which anyone who, even if you haven't seen Scarface, I think that line
Yeah.
is from this film, or if not from this film, that Pacino says it. And then we get the famous death. And you can read it. You can read into the symbolism. I'll give you my take, Devlin, and I'd be interested to hear what you think. But yeah, he falls from the balcony. He plunges to the depths. He goes into water. Water normally symbolic of transformation, so life to death. A fall from grace. You can all sorts of things, or you could just say he just got shot in the back. But what I did like was that he's getting shot by everybody from the front, and it's almost symbolic of Tony's character, is that he can take anything head on, but he's blindsided and that blind that aspect is the coke. I think that's what's being set up, is that because this is set up and payoff. He earlier on in the film is looking at the surveillance cameras. He notices a truck and he says to Manny, "That truck's been there for 3 days." And Manny says to him something like, "Have you been watching that constantly?" And he says, "Well, how can I not? It's been there." There's a lovely shot where it pans from the surveillance cameras to Tony just sat blank with the coke in front of him, and they're flooding in, and he doesn't see it. And to me, that's a nice little visual storytelling of Tony's been blindsided, and that's why he doesn't see it. And the reason why he's the architect of his own downfall. He's the one who opens the balcony doors. If he doesn't open the balcony doors, the killer can't come in behind him. So that's why I think they choose this nameless, almost faceless killer. Kind of. He's like a Terminator. I guess there's probably a little reference there. I think it was Terminator 83 as well.
Terminator was 84, so
Oh wow!
this
so
is why I found it interesting that it precedes it by a year.
Oh, this beats Terminator then.
But I would imagine that Terminator would be, probably at least starting production though.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting James Cameron watched this and went, yes, that's a good look. Glasses.
I've got a cracking idea.
Yeah.
Bring me an enormous Austrian.
But I definitely think that he takes the bullets head on, and he does. He sort of waves and like, "Oh, come on!"
Yeah,
he can take.
That's where I just thought like we were crossing from operatic into very silly.
Well, maybe I'm being generous then. Yeah. What were your thoughts on the ending, other than what you've just said, with it being very silly?
Oh no. Not to say that silly is bad. It's just that because it's been such a long film to this point, if I were to think back to that incredibly tense, incredibly well executed early sequence, and the same goes for the execution of Frank and Mel, those two things came from a completely different film to this. We've built up to it. The film's earned it. It's just that maybe I would have found it a little more fascinating if we'd have managed to keep it on the rails a bit more. On the rails is kind of a pun.
That's fair enough.
But yeah, but this is the iconic moment. I mean, it's possible that this film is only so well renowned and so well remembered and so culturally pervasive because of this sequence. So it seems ridiculous to slag it off for it. But yeah, just as it's not the part of the film that I found the most interesting. I felt like the first 2/3 of the film were more interesting, and that it's a satisfying conclusion because you watch a lot of films that fumble the third act. I don't think this fumbles it. I just think that this takes a weird zag off to a completely different direction, and that's fine, and that it's a satisfying conclusion to the film. It's just it's a bit of a lurch from where we started, but I like it as a sequence, and yeah, production design and it's very practical, and it feels very legitimate and very real. And you think this is sort of a similar-ish era to something like Commando, which we obviously both love, but Commando is very silly. This is somewhat pushing in that direction. There's less springboards, but we're in the same ballpark, aren't we? We're still in the same ballpark of 80s excess. Just get the biggest guns you have and just mash people into a fine pulp with them.
Well, with that in mind, Devlin, would you recommend Scarface 1983?
I absolutely would. I was very impressed, especially with the early going. I think it's totally deserving of its reputation, and um, yeah, glad I finally got around to it twice, no less. And as ever, we ask whether you, as the repeat viewer of this, did you waste your youth on Scarface?
I don't think I did. I think I'm in total agreement with you. I think the strength of the writing, it's apparent with how many quotable lines there are and that are still relevant even today. I think the character of Tony Montana has been so widely adopted in other media forms. Uh, Clearly, the film, in that respect, is a success. But I think there's more to the film than just the aesthetics, the music, and the cautionary tale and of the rise and fall of Tony Montana. I think there's satire. I think there's
Yeah.
politics. We didn't really touch upon the politics, communism versus capitalism,
Hmm.
but it's there. Small, but it's there, and there's clearly huge statements being made about excess and uh, what that can lead to, and how even in achieving the greatest wealth in the world, you won't necessarily lead to satisfaction. Um, I also think that essentially you've got a trio of artists who have fully mastered their craft at this point. You've got Oliver Stone, the writer. You've got Al Pacino, the performer, and I think you've got Brian De Palma as the director, all working at a really, really high level. I'd recommend this film to anybody who enjoys and watches films, full stop. In particular, those that are not aware of De Palma and his back catalogue. Along with Mission Impossible and maybe The Untouchables, this is probably his most accessible film to a wide audience. But hopefully, if you watch this, it might encourage you to seek out some of his more obscure works. Even something like Carrie, which was made in what 1976. So
Yeah, 76, 78 maybe, but yeah,
yeah,
like
it's either way. We're talking 70s. So you think some
yeah.
of our younger listeners, they're not going to watch that. They're going to watch the 2012 remake or whatever it was with Chloe Moretz. Go back and seek out De Palma's Carrie.
Is anyone watching The Rage Carrie 2?
No one's watching that one. Is that the Mavis one? Oh no,
No, it was
no!
it
Oh no,
was theatrically
right. Oh
released.
god, no one is watching that, including me, because I've not seen it, but I've read terrible things. But
Maybe I'll make you watch it.
yeah, I think you will. But yeah, it also go back and watch Dress to Kill, Body Double.
Mm,
Unfortunately, for every Scarface and for every Untouchables, there's a Mission to Mars. But he's one of those directors that I just don't think has got the same cachet as a Scorsese or a Spielberg or a Coppola or even a George Lucas. But he's definitely worth seeking out. So I would say I did not waste my youth, and I would recommend Scarface. And I believe it's on Netflix and Amazon Prime, and they're not
oh
even
my
paying
God.
us, Devlin.
That's nuts.
Crazy, yo.
Yeah.
Now I have a question for you.
Oh my God.
What is the next episode, Devlin? What is your choice for the throwback series? I'm
Well, you
very
know what?
excited.
I've been keeping a little list of late, and there's a couple in here that there's a couple in here I really want to pull the trigger on. But I feel like week one, we watched a film that I'd seen a lot. You had either not seen or had only seen a couple of times, or
Are you
maybe
going to split the difference? Because neither of us liked week one. We
yeah.
both
We both
recommended Scarface, and we're now going to watch a film that polarizes us to keep it interesting.
Well, what I'm actually going to say is that I feel like we need to watch a film that had a huge influence on my childhood, and I'm all but certain had a massive influence on yours as well. It's about time that me and you properly talked about Predator 2.
Oh, boy. Want some candy, Devlin?
I do
Okay,
want
yeah,
some candy. I will tell you the
Well-
story next time out.
Oh no, you keep that jism in your pants. Yeah.
But me
Right.
and Predator 2
Predator
me and
2.
Predator 2 have got a long history. So
Devlin, I'm too old for this shit. You get Danny Glover doing Predator 2.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. You know what? More than happy. I can't think of the last time I saw it. I think I tried. You know what? I tried to watch it with my girlfriend last year. Got 5 minutes in.
really,
She was not. Yeah, she's a big Predator fan, but she did not like Predator
'Cause
2, so I didn't watch it.
I remember I've
But,
seen this film with you. We'll talk about this next time, but I've seen this.
Oh wow, we have watched this
Yeah.
together, haven't we?
Yeah. Okay. Well, Gali, first you get the sugar, then you get the power, then you get the women. Good night.
Wow, I don't think I can top that. I'll say good night, listeners, and we'll see you next time in the urban jungle that is LA for Predator fucking.
Welcome to the not too distant future.
Oh, laser guns. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. Hi everyone, I've got a quick favour to ask. If you enjoyed the podcast, could you rate it and maybe even leave a review? We'd really appreciate it. Also, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the films that we review, so send us a message on Twitter. Finally, for all other information about the Rewind Movie Podcast, check out the website rewindmoviecast.com. Once again, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the Rewind Movie Podcast.